At 3:18, the Black Sea looked calm over Feodosia Bay, but only for a heartbeat. Without warning, Russia's Black Sea Fleet struck first two 295 milliseconds bombers launched Kinjal hypersonic missiles, while Su-30 SM fighters and Orlan 10 drones swept in low, hidden by coastal radar clip. This wasn't just a raid, it was a full-scale strike aimed at turning Feodosia Naval Base into an untouchable fortress and sealing off Ukraine's southern coast. Yet Ukrainian MiG-29 seconds, F-16 seconds, long-range UAVs, and stealthy USV drone boats were already racing in, ready to flip the battle within minutes. Don't take your eyes off the screen until the secret is revealed. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about this battle in the comments section. Thank you for watching. The opening Russian strike may have aimed to dominate, but it only triggered Ukraine's trap. Within minutes of intercepting the incoming Kinzhal signatures over Feodosia, Ukraine activated its own multi-axis assault, starting with the quiet unraveling of Russia's radar eyes. Bayraktar TB2 drones swept in low across the Gulf, emitting powerful jamming signals that drowned out early warning radar arrays around Primorsk. Russian operators watched their scopes blur into static just as Gyrza M armored gunboats surged forward at over 40 miles per hour from concealed positions. At less than 3 miles from shore, they opened fire 30mm cannons, hammering docked guard ships, while R-360 Neptune missiles launched in tandem, hugging the sea at just 30 feet above the waterline. Each missile struck with pinpoint accuracy, detonating near the midsections of moored corvettes and auxiliary vessels, sending shockwaves across the bay. Beneath the surface, the assault was even more insidious. Robotic submersibles released hours earlier by unmanned surface vessels crawled silently along the seabed. At 0 hour, they attached magnetic charges to the keels of targeted ships, including a Utiloi-class destroyer and a missile support tender. Fuses were timed to detonate just as the Neptunes hit, creating synchronized explosions above and below the waterline. Meanwhile, S-300 air defense systems stationed on Ukraine's coastline launched precision salvos that blanketed known Bastion P positions. Under threat and facing jamming interference, Russian P-800 Onyx crews hesitated long enough to miss their firing window. By 3:29 a.m., Primorsk's piers were engulfed in fireballs. Ship fuel tanks ignited. Ammunition stores cooked off. What had been a prepared fortress just minutes before was now a fractured port, its defenses overwhelmed, its airspace contested, and its seaborne corridor wide open. The coordinated air-sea strike had left Primorsk reeling, its piers ablaze, and several corvettes gutted. But even as Ukrainian forces pressed the advantage, Russia was already preparing to hit back with speed, range, and fury. At 3:34 a.m., just 5 minutes after the Neptune struck, the first retaliatory launches came screaming from hardened Bastion P coastal batteries dug into cliffs just north of the port. The P-800 Onyx missiles, each over 26 feet long and traveling at nearly Mach 2.6, streaked across the Gulf of Finland at treetop level, leaving thunderous sonic cracks in their wake. Programmed to seek out Ukrainian drone ships and strike craft, the Onyx missiles were guided in real time by Orlan 10 reconnaissance UAVs circling above the combat zone. Simultaneously, Admiral Grigorovich-class frigates stationed roughly 18 miles offshore began feeding updated coordinates to fire control centers onshore, attempting to orchestrate a counteroffensive before Ukraine could consolidate its foothold. Dozens of missile trails raced the sky, converging toward what Russia hoped were Ukrainian positions along the coast and beyond the harbor smoke. But Ukraine wasn't idle. Camouflage beneath dense tree lines 10 miles west of the shoreline, mobile HIMARS launchers activated almost instantly. Sighted onto Bastion P radar emitters and command relay posts, they fired ripple salvos of guided rockets. Within seconds, the missiles punched through reinforced bunkers and destroyed a key coastal node that had been coordinating Onyx fire data. The effects were immediate. Orlan 10 uplinks went dark. Several P-800 missiles abruptly veered off course, slamming into open sea or detonating prematurely. Ukrainian air defense teams supported by S-300 interceptors further inland picked off the remaining threats with clean, mid-air kills. Their white-hot interceptions lighting the low clouds like a thunderstorm. By 3:46 a.m., what was meant to be Russia's coordinated counterstrike had unraveled into confusion. The Bastion P batteries, once seen as the immovable wall guarding Primorsk, were now sputtering, blind, and cut off from fleet coordination. Ukrainian forces had not only absorbed the hit, but shattered the logic behind Russia's response. The battle had moved beyond just missiles. Now it was a war of networks, and Ukraine had just severed the backbone of Russia's coastal kill chain. The smoke from Russia's failed Bastion P counterstrike still hung in the air when Ukraine moved to exploit the chaos. With Russian missile crews disrupted, fire control radars offline, and drone surveillance silenced by EW jamming, the battlefield was open and Kyiv wasted no time driving the knife in deeper. At 3:51 a.m., the second wave was launched. From concealed mobile launchers near the southern coastline, a barrage of R-360 Neptune missiles surged into the sky, leveled off at low altitude, and sped toward Primorsk just 30 to 40 feet above the water. Each cruise missile carried a 330-pound warhead, programmed to strike high-value targets still afloat or attempting to rearm. The Neptune wave aimed squarely at the vulnerable core of Russia's harbor, where damaged warships, fuel tenders, and command barges clustered in disarray. But the real kill shot was already crawling beneath the surface. Hours before the missile launch, Ukraine had deployed a dozen AUV's autonomous underwater robots from USV motherships camouflaged as fishing boats. These submersible saboteurs, each about 6 feet long, had crept silently along the seabed into the inner harbor, guided by sonar and pre-loaded terrain maps. Their mission: strike from below just as the missiles struck from above. At 3 hours, 52 minutes and 20 seconds a.m., the AUVs made the final approach. Magnetic clamps snapped into place on the hulls of 3 high-value targets: a Udaloy-class destroyer, a Buoyant M missile corvette, and a logistics support tender. Each explosive was shaped for maximum upward force, aimed at engine blocks or ammunition storage. Fuses were synchronized down to the millisecond. At 3:53 a.m., the Neptune missiles hit. One tore through the forward deck of the corvette, igniting a fuel chain reaction. Another slammed into the destroyer's aft radar tower. As the fireballs rolled skyward, the underwater charges detonated in unison. The harbor convulsed. The Udaloy's keel cracked and its stern began to sink rapidly. The corvette erupted from beneath, lifted by a blast that broke its spine and threw its lifeboats into the air. The tender, loaded with volatile cargo, vanished in a blinding explosion that sprayed burning fuel across nearby piers. On the surface, Russian sailors dove into cold black water, some injured, others simply stunned. But worse than the damage was the blindness. High above, Ukrainian EW UAVs maintained continuous jamming of Orlan 1-0 relays. Coastal command posts lost contact with drones, ships, and even each other. Defensive coordination collapsed into isolated bursts of gunfire and panicked radio traffic. By 4:04 a.m., Primorsk wasn't just burning, it was blind, bleeding, and sinking. Ukraine had pierced the harbor's defenses not just with firepower, but with precision, timing, and multi-domain warfare. Russia had prepared for missiles, but not for machines rising from the sea. The synchronized blasts of Neptune missiles and underwater robot strikes had shattered Primorsk's naval backbone. Flames devoured the piers. Broken hulls leaked oil into black water. But Ukraine wasn't done. The next objective was total isolation cut the arteries and the port would bleed out. At 4:08 a.m., that objective began. From high above the Gulf of Finland, a formation of Mi-29 seconds sliced through the pre-dawn haze at over 500 miles per hour, flanking a squadron of heavy-lift drones. These unmanned aircraft, each carrying precision-guided glide bombs, banked eastward toward Primorsk's rear logistics sector. Below them, radar returns were faint. Russian surveillance had gone dark minutes ago, and the airspace was nearly uncontested. The MiGs cleared the path with electronic jamming bursts, while the drones dove into bombing profiles. The first bombs struck fuel depots clustered near the East Rail Yard. Fireballs rolled 200 feet into the sky. Secondary explosions tore through nearby structures, diesel drums, munitions, crates, mobile radar trailers. Minutes later, another drone released its payload on a reinforced command bunker, punching through the roof and detonating deep inside. The resulting pressure wave blasted out every vent and hatch, collapsing the structure from within. On the surface, Gyrza M gunboats provided masking support. They crisscrossed the southern bay, laying down thick smoke curtains to shield the air assault's approach and retreat. Russian anti-air batteries, confused by ghost targets and fried optics, fired sporadically, hitting nothing. Suddenly, two P-1000 Vulcan missiles, launched from a frigate offshore, arcing toward the coast. But Ukraine's S-300 crews, already tracking from inland groves, intercepted both mid-flight, detonating them with blinding flashes before they reached landfall. By 4:19 a.m., the job was done. Primorsk's refueling and ammunition loops were gone. Buoyant M corvettes, cut off from fuel, firepower, and command, floated powerless, trapped in a harbor that had become a graveyard. Ukraine hadn't just breached the port, they had sealed it. The airstrike had sealed Primorsk's fate from above. Fuel depots ignited, command bunkers leveled, and missile response crushed in the sky. But the final blow would come from the ground. Ukraine was no longer just dismantling the port's combat systems, they were about to take the docks, inch by inch. At 4:22 a.m., under a canopy of smoke and drone cover, the next move unfolded. 3 stealth RIBs, rigid inflatable boats painted jet black, slipped through the eastern channel at full throttle, barely 12 inches above the surface. Inside were Ukrainian special operations teams, each armed with suppressed carbines, demolition kits, and encrypted uplinks. Their mission wasn't to hold ground. It was to finish the port's isolation. As the boats made landfall near the East Quay, overhead UAVs maintained air dominance, scanning for heat signatures and jamming any remaining Russian radio traffic. The soldiers disembarked in silence, moving quickly between twisted steel beams and burning containers. Their first objective, rescue. Ukrainian teams located and extracted multiple wounded Russian sailors trapped below decks or behind collapsed bulkheads. Without hesitation, they administered field aid and flagged coordinates for drone-assisted evacuation. No prisoners, just human lives pulled from the wreckage. Next, they breached a buried comms bunker at the base of a half-collapsed crane. Inside, servers still flickered, part of Russia's encrypted Bastion P control network. Thermite charges were placed. The entire room vaporized in a white-hot roar, erasing every byte. Finally, the team used laser guidance relays to call in follow-on support. UGVs, small tracked robot units, rolled off hidden launch platforms and crawled through the blast zones, zeroing in on the few remaining Bastion P launchers still camouflaged near the north wall. One by one, shaped charges disabled them permanently. By 4:35 a.m., Ukraine wasn't just attacking Primorsk, they had taken it apart from the inside. No air cover, no missiles, no comms, and now, no escape. The port was fully isolated, physically, digitally, and tactically. By 4:36 a.m., with Ukrainian special forces having disabled the last Bastion P launchers and scorched the Russian comms grid, Primorsk Naval Port was a battlefield in ruins. But silence wasn't enough, not yet. The goal was complete neutralization. No radars, no launchers, no recovery. As the night dragged into the early morning hours, Ukrainian UAV strike teams took over the skies. Operating in coordinated swarms, the drones scanned every inch of the port, using thermal imaging and radar reflection to identify surviving radar masts, ammunition trucks, and any signs of operational machinery. Every detection triggered an immediate response, either a loitering munition dive or a precision missile drop. Flashes lit up the skeletal remains of Primorsk's inland district as radar dishes were incinerated, missile crates exploded, and support vehicles burst into flame. The base no longer resembled a functioning port, it looked like a scrapyard hit by an airstrike every 5 minutes. Meanwhile, HIMARS units stationed 10 miles inland began ripple-firing GPS-guided rockets toward the access roads and service tunnels near the southern quay and the northern freight ramps. Their objective: block every possible escape. The concrete channels collapsed under the impacts, forming cratered chokeholds, trapping half-submerged corvettes and scorched supply ships inside the bay. By the time the first light touched the Gulf of Finland, Primorsk was silent. No signals, no launches, no orders. Just a smoking graveyard of warped steel, severed data lines, and drifting oil fires. What began as a coordinated strike had ended as a surgical purge. The Black Sea Fleet's northern lifeline had not only been severed, it had been erased. By 5:07 a.m., Primorsk naval port no longer functioned as a military asset. The final drone strikes and HIMARS salvos had reduced it to a scorched ruin. The Udaloy-class destroyers listed are half-sunken. Buyan M corvettes, charred down to their waterlines, drifted without power. An Admiral Grigorovich frigate, locked between twisted piers, smoldered quietly in place. Strategically, Russia's loss was severe. Primorsk had served as a key northern Baltic refuel and missile forward base, enabling rapid deployments across the Gulf of Finland. With its destruction, every sortie now required a long reroute, and pressure on the Baltic corridor was instantly reduced. But one question lingers in the smoke. If even Primorsk, defended by Bastion, Onyx, missiles, and hardened infrastructure, can fall overnight, what Russian harbor is truly secure? In a notable act of discipline, Ukrainian forces evacuated wounded Russian sailors and maintained safe corridors for rescue vessels, emphasizing a doctrine of disabling warfighting tools, not lives. As sunlight pierced through the rising smoke, it framed not just a battlefield, but a turning point, one where drone-robot coordination may define the next era of maritime warfare. At 4:07 a.m. near the outskirts of Tahanrog, the air was heavy, too quiet. Suddenly, Russian supply convoys escorted by BTRs and Panzer-Sony II flooded into the depot, hauling over 3.6 million pounds of fuel and ammunition, enough to fuel a 3-division assault on Zaporizhia. This wasn't routine logistics. It was a southern spearhead meant to tilt the entire front. And then, the silence broke. What followed wasn't just an attack, it was a masterclass in joint warfare. The Russian convoys hadn't even finished unloading when the sky betrayed them. Just 12 minutes after the first truck rolled into Tahanrog's depot, 6 Ukrainian Beaver reconnaissance drones breached the airspace from high altitude, fanning out over a 5-mile grid. Flying alongside them, 2 aging Tuesday 141 jets screamed in on low-level runs, broadcasting a massive radar signature meant to mimic a full-scale bombing raid. Russian radar station lit up. Believing a major airstrike was inbound, operators activated the Panzer S-1 systems and fired off multiple 57 E-6 missiles, each costing $60,000 into the empty morning sky. That was the cue. From just above the treetops, a strike package of kamikaze FPV drones, each no bigger than a toolbox, darted through the radar blind spot at under 150 feet, guided by terrain-following AI. Within seconds, they slammed into the fuel tankers at the rear of the Russian column. The first fireball lit up the depot like sunrise. 2 more drones followed, hitting 2 ammo trucks, triggering secondary explosions that tore through the staging area. Before the smoke could settle, tracked recon robots rolled in from concealed ditches near the tree line, their thermal cameras scanning for heat signatures. They transmitted coordinates of still-active machine gun nests and mobile radar trucks deeper inside the compound. The decoy strike had worked. Russia fired its shadows while the real knives slipped in. The flames from the initial drone strikes were still rising when the next wave hit, this time from the dirt, not the sky. With Russian air defenses overwhelmed and distracted, Ukraine deployed its second blade in the ambush. Autonomous ground robots, the size of backpacks, nicknamed Iron Beetles. Released from low-flying tactical drones just 300 feet above the tree line, these bots landed softly using micro-parachutes, then scurried on 6 wheels toward the Russian tank yard just east of the depot. Their mission was simple: find, crawl, and kill. One by one, the Beetles slid underneath parked T-90 tanks, latching onto the chassis using magnetized arms. Each carried a shaped charged directional mine pre-programmed to detonate upon engine ignition. The trap was now set, waiting for any Russian crew to so much as turn a key. Meanwhile, from the southwest, 6-man Ukrainian strike teams on dirt bikes sped in across a dry irrigation canal, their engines muffled with improvised suppressors. Using suppressed carbines and short-barrel SMGs, they quietly neutralized 3 Russian guard posts along the perimeter. One team even slipped into a fuel trailer yard, placing thermal charges beneath fuel drums stacked 2 stories high. These weren't blunt force raids. This was surgical sabotage, executed with ruthless precision. By the time Russian operators began reacting to the initial drone explosions, their internal perimeter had already been compromised. Machine gun nests were silent, fuel yards were rigged, and in the tank yard, no one yet noticed the little metal insects resting beneath $5 million worth of steel. Back in Kyiv, Kir Command watched the live drone feeds in silence. Every move had gone to plan so far. But they knew. The deeper you cut into the beast, the louder it thrashes. The real battle hadn't even started yet. The Iron Beetles had done their job. Russian guards were down, fuel yards were rigged, and tanks sat in silence, some already doomed to explode the moment they moved. But now, the operation shifted gears. It was time to break the perimeter. From the tree line near the southern coastline, a column of Ukrainian T-84 Oplot tanks began to roll forward. Behind them, YPR 765 armored personnel carriers, retrofitted for urban assault, advanced in staggered formation. The distance from the staging forest to the outer Russian trench lines was barely 1.2 miles, but every inch would be contested. Overhead, spotter drones circling at 2,000 feet relayed real-time thermal data to a Ukrainian artillery battery 8 miles to the west. Within seconds, self-propelled howitzers opened up. The barrage wasn't random, it was choreographed. Each shell landed with unnerving precision, targeting Russian mortar pits, ATGM nests, and radar trailers, all of which had been identified by the recon robots and drones during the earlier chaos. The Russian defenders barely had time to return fire before their coordinates lit up red on every Ukrainian drone screen. Then came the tanks. The first T-84 crested a low ridge and fired its 125mm gun straight into a fortified machine gun bunker. The impact cracked open the position, sending concrete and steel flying. The Ukrainian armor pushed fast, just 20 yards behind the artillery fire line, gambling on momentum and confusion. Russian infantry attempted to regroup, firing RPGs from behind berms and container stacks, but the YPR carriers unleashed 30mm autocannon fire, sweeping trenches clean before the Ukrainian infantry inside even dismounted. At the center of the advance, one Oplot took a glancing hit from a Russian Kornet missile, but its ERA armor absorbed most of the damage. It kept moving, now less than 900 feet from the depot's southern gate. Ukrainian troops riding inside the YPRs prepped breaching charges, ready to punch through the final fencing. Above, loitering munitions stood by, waiting to dive on any Russian vehicle that dared break cover. In less than 12 minutes, Ukraine had done what many thought impossible. They had armored units within striking distance of Tatarrog's main logistics hub, right under the nose of Russia's southern command. And still, Kyiv hadn't played its final card. With Ukrainian armor now less than 300 yards from the southern gate, Russia's command center inside the Tatarrog depot finally realized this wasn't a probing raid, it was a full-scale multi-domain assault. And yet, they still hadn't seen what was coming from above. At 22,000 feet, a pair of MiG-29 fighter jets sliced across the morning sky, running east to west over the depot's airspace. Their mission wasn't to strike, it was to bait. The jets broadcast radar signatures and encrypted targeting links, mimicking an impending cruise missile launch. Within seconds, Russian radar crews locked on, believing high-altitude strikes were inbound. As expected, Boris Gleb's 2 electronic warfare units activated across the grid, flooding the 5.8 GHz frequency range with broad-spectrum jamming, aiming to blind any drones or incoming missiles. The trap had sprung, but not on the jets. Flying barely 130 feet off the ground, a Reboth kamikaze drone used the radar chaos as cover. Outfitted with a 10-pound shaped charge warhead, it hugged the terrain like a hawk in a canyon. Its mission: punch a hole straight through the depot's reinforced northern wall. But just as the Reboth crossed the outer fence, its onboard systems lit up. Russian jammers had found it. The video feed glitched, GPS flickered, and guidance briefly stalled. And then, the pilot in Kyiv flipped the switch. Instantly, the drone severed its wireless link and transitioned to fiber optic control, a physical connection running from a tactical relay point hidden in a gutted farmhouse just 1.5 miles outside the depot. Radio waves could be jammed, but a beam of light inside a glass thread? Unstoppable. Despite crosswinds rattling the cable and nearby thermal sensors sweeping the sky, the Reboth stayed locked on. Its AI flight controller made hundreds of micro-corrections per second, keeping it low, fast, and lethal. Back at the depot, Russian crews were still tracking the MiGs. No one noticed the silent shadow drifting just above the treetops until it was too late. The real sting was already inside the wire. The Reboth was less than 600 feet from its target when everything nearly fell apart. A Russian FPV patrol drone, running a routine thermal sweep from the east, suddenly picked up a heat bloom, the engine signature of the Reboth, as it skimmed above the depot wall. Within seconds, it banked hard and closed in. If it got visual confirmation, the entire operation risked unraveling. Inside a Kyiv basement, the Ukrainian drone pilot's screen flashed red. The AI guidance stuttered, the fiber optic cable rattled with tension, and jamming levels spiked again. He had no time to think, only react. He punched the throttle. The Reboth surged forward, cutting a sharp, gut-wrenching turn between 2 derelict warehouses barely 20 feet apart, using the concrete walls as both cover and radar shade. The drone's rotors scraped within inches of rusted sheet metal, but the signal held the cable still intact. At that exact moment, Ukraine's Special Forces team, hidden in the tree line to the west, activated their backup plan. A laser designator lit up a decoy drone already waiting above a nearby building. Its engine flared hot, mimicking the reboat's thermal signature. The Russian patrol drone took the bait, veering off to chase the ghost. The real drone stayed low, steady, deadly. Below, at the depot's north gate, a Russian command truck had just pulled into position, officers inside, unaware of the hunter overhead. The timing was perfect. The reboat dipped once, locked on, and dove straight into the hood of the command vehicle, its shaped charge punching through steel like butter. But that was just the trigger. Inside the depot wall, behind the truck, sat hundreds of thousands of pounds of stacked munitions. The chain reaction was instant. A thunderclap ripped across the complex as the initial detonation set off a cascade of secondary explosions. The depot didn't just erupt, it disintegrated in a rolling wave of fire, metal, and shock. And the drone? Gone. Mission complete. The first blast was deafening, but it was only the beginning. For the next 4 minutes, Tahanrog's depot became an open furnace. Stored Grad rockets, stacked by the dozens, ignited in chaotic succession. Some launched straight into the sky, others spiraled off course and slammed into Russian barracks less than 300 yards away, shredding tents, vehicles, and communication trailers. Fire rolled across the complex like a living thing. To make sure no recovery was possible, Ukraine deployed a second kamikaze drone, this one targeting the last remaining communications tower still standing near the depot's east perimeter. With one final plunge, it crashed into the structure, triggering a second wave of detonations that lit up the horizon. Within minutes, the entire logistics infrastructure of Tahanrog, including fuel depots, radar stations, mobile command units, and underground ammo bunkers, was wiped off the map. All that remained was a 300-foot-wide crater, a pillar of black smoke reaching into the dawn sky, and silence on Russian comms. Back in Kyiv, one HER officer looked at the scorched satellite feed and whispered, "We just turned their fortress into a funeral pyre." And the mission wasn't just successful, it was surgical. Tahanrog, Russia's southern logistics lifeline, was gone. The strike crippled supply routes into Crimea, forcing Moscow to withdraw troops from the Azov axis for at least 3 weeks to regroup. It wasn't just a tactical win, it was a strategic rupture. And yet, even amid the firestorm, Ukrainian soldiers found 2 wounded Russian troops, pulling them from the wreckage and stabilizing them until medics arrived. The message was clear. This war is about precision, not cruelty. As the smoke curled into the dawn sky, a lone recon robot rolled back into the blast zone, transmitting one final signal: mission complete.